everybody, welcome to Fantasy R&R. This is your host Ryan, and it's time to talk about Trevor.
This is Fantasy with Rob and Ryan, Fantasy R&R.
This one's going to be a solo podcast. Going to be bringing up two specific topics that need to be talked about on this podcast. And the reason I'm doing so is because I don't want to live in any type of delusion here. And I just don't do that on this podcast. This podcast, I've had for a few years. It's not popular at all, right? We got less than 400 subscribers. People don't listen on a regular basis. A lot of our videos aren't consistently watched. People probably don't enjoy a lot of what we're saying. We're not like, wow, like the Pat McAfee show and all that shit. But over the years, there has been some good football talk on this podcast. A lot of it has to do with the Jags because I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida. I live in Boston, Massachusetts now, and Rob does still live in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And Rob admittedly has not been a Jaguars fan his whole life. However, I have. 1994, my family moved to Jacksonville, Florida when my dad got transferred, and the team was generated and owned by the Wayne Weaver family, and I've seen the original unveiling of the silver uniforms. I was there to see the first game. We saw Morton Anderson's missed kick when the Jags go into the playoffs, the second year they've been in the league under Tom Coughlin. I've been there through it all. There's a lot of people that I would even talk to. They'd be like, our wide receiver coach, in 2017 or whatever, is like Keenan McCardle. This guy's doing a great job. It's like, yeah, well, no shit. He was on the Jaguars, for the first 6 years of their existence. So I could see the disconnect sometimes that people have with the Jaguars, where it doesn't feel like a real team. There's the joke about, do these fans even exist? And this is why, because it's fair weather stuff. Now, I'm sorry, Rob, I'm going to have to brutalize you a little bit here, but I want to get honest on this podcast. One of the things that I have always liked about this podcast is it gives me the ability to be right and wrong and just see where it goes. So a few years ago, obviously, we have a podcast just about Deontay Foreman and how not to give up on him in the league yet. I did a podcast solely on that alone a few years ago. Obviously, I've been a big Jalen Hurts homer on this podcast. This is one of those guys that was just pretty much dismissed by everybody, and I've been telling everyone for years on this podcast, Jalen Hurts is going to be a fucking superstar. But I also like to admit where I'm wrong on this podcast. I don't like to brush it under the rug, make excuses. I don't like to pretend I never thought that way. I don't like to switch gears real quick, just pick a new favorite team out of nowhere, so to speak. I've been wrong. Chase Edmonds, when I thought was going to be a steal one year, was a terrible pick. Najee Harris, on one of the podcasts, I said I might even consider him number one overall over Jonathan Taylor. Now, Jonathan Taylor I was right about, but Najee Harris, not even close, right? Maybe he's having a bounce back right now, but he doesn't look like a top 10 RB most of the time. So I have to realize that stuff and then adjust going forward. That's how you realize from your mistakes and you learn to kind of navigate the fantasy world a little better. With Trevor Lawrence, I'm not seeing it. It's time to talk about Trevor. I think the guy might just be a bad quarterback. Nice dude, level-headed, seems intelligent. Maybe he's playing on some injury here. But through his first 3 seasons in the league, he's not even coming close to Baker Mayfield's statistics with his first 3 years in the league. And arguably, Baker had way less to work with. And a lot of people look at Baker Mayfield like he's a shitty quarterback. Well, I mean, he's pissing all over Trevor Lawrence's stats in the first 3 years. And you're talking about a season where Trevor is established now. He knows the playbook. He's with Doug Peterson. They've been together now 2 seasons. He's got Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram. Our defense is showing up most of the time. There's not much more you can do. Trevor is throwing an abysmal 9 touchdowns to 9 turnovers right now. He can't get the Jaguars into the end zone. They never look like an NFL team. We're sputtering through this season. We lost to the Texans when Stroud had no NFL experience. Forget, whatever your opinions about him may be. We couldn't score a touchdown against Kansas City. We just can't get into the end zone. And, picking off these wins against teams that are the same way, like the Saints and stuff like that, that's not going to impress me. Trevor's first year, 11 TDs to 14 interceptions, That's rough even for a rookie. Baker had a positive TD to interception ratio and broke Peyton Manning's record. And we kind of just dismissed the guy. But now here he is kind of taking the Buccaneers to a little bit of a better path and, arguably most quarterbacks would have in that era, like Ryan Fitzpatrick or someone like that. So what I'm trying to get at here is I feel as though the Trevor experiment's over. We know that he was a really exciting player in college, but so far Joe Burrow has outplayed him in college and he's outplayed him in the NFL. Um, I think the Trevor Lawrence name is what keeps people around. It's a sexy name. They know about his accolades in college. He's a number one overall pick, former number one overall pick, but that doesn't always pan out. There's only 18 number one overall picks of any position in the NFL that have gone on to win a Super Bowl ring. The last QB to do so was Eli Manning. Doesn't mean these guys are just unequivocally going to be good. Baker Mayfield was a number one overall pick. And I don't think Trevor lives up to that standard. I don't think he can hack it in the NFL. He's probably going to be a career backup at best, and I think the Jaguars should move on when they can do so and look elsewhere. You can't have this kind of offense and this receiving core and be this bad. It's almost impressive to be this bad with this receiving core, and I would like to see Jacksonville not pay Trevor. I don't want to see an extension. It's at the point where I'm like, all right, I've seen enough. This has gone on far enough. He's been in the NFL long enough with the same people. It's over. So fantasy purposes, I'm moving on from Trevor. And here's the second topic I got to talk about, and I got to call out Rob a little bit here for someone who is on the podcast a lot talking about the Jaguars and what a powerhouse they're going to be this year. And we tried to execute this draft strategy at the beginning of the year of getting Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley, and Travis Etienne, and getting convinced that the Jaguars are going to be a powerhouse offense. There are some things under the radar here that I think have to do with it, and it's during the offseason, I was savvy enough to snag Ridley off the waivers. Somebody had dropped him when he was out of the league for an entire year, and this is a keeper league, so it's very aggressive, and we play by the waiver rules, and I picked him up. I picked up Ridley and I stashed him. And all offseason, I kept thinking to myself, it's like, yeah, like my team looks crazy. It looks crazy. I got Jalen Hurts. I traded Jonathan Taylor for Cooper Kupp, and which ended up being 50-50 for both of us eventually with the injuries and everything. And, I have Saquon Barkley since 2018 when I had the number one overall rookie pick. And my team looks good. And I traded away a king's ransom to get Trevor Lawrence onto my team. And I did a lot to make it happen because a lot of us in the league are Jacksonville guys, and we did, like I said, we don't want to give up that sexy name of Trevor Lawrence. And I go after Rob, and I'm like, all right, dude, let's make a deal. Give me ETN back. Because this is another thing where it's like for somebody you say you believe in so much, ETN was on the waivers. I picked him up before anyone. He went undrafted in our rookie draft that year. He was on my team first before anybody's. So James Robinson's getting all the carries. I trade away ETN for Pittman because I need a wide receiver at the time, and ETN's not turning into an RB1 or anything. And Rob hits the jackpot there, and I've been okay with Pittman, but I said, I'm like, come on, man, trade him back to me. That way we can test out this theory on the podcast. He just won't do it. Sometimes you take this thing too seriously, man. So here's what happens. Now I've got Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley on my team, and I don't want them. I think it was just last week, Rob, you offered me Eckler. You're like, let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. So what did I do last night? I told you I've seen enough this week from Trevor. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm reacting to what I say. And I lay down the law. Brian Robinson Jr. is turning into a fantastic running back. Another guy I call that nobody in this league saw coming. And I've got a lot of running backs, and I need to rebuild my team a little bit because of the Trevor Lawrence debacle. So I'm sending Brian Robinson as a number 4 overall fantasy RB right now over to my cousin Kent in return for the number 3 overall QB, Justin Herbert. And I'm okay with that because with the other RB names on my team, I was only playing Brian Robinson every time I thought he was going to get some kind of momentum going. And this year has been, 1 week 8.4, next week 27.2, next week 9, next week 20, next week 4. It's like I can't start him on the right days. And that's frustrating enough when you're watching your quarterback turn over the ball 4 times. So I managed to get this trade for Herbert, and Rob's been going after Herbert for a long time, and no one's been giving him up. But I think it has a lot to do with the kind of trades that Rob throws out, and he's trying to shice people here. I got to call you out, buddy. And I don't think it's right, because what ended up happening is, I'm like, all right, I just text him straight up, and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing what I said the other night after that game. I'm moving on from Trevor and Ridley. You're on our last podcast here talking about how Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley are going to turn it around. I asked you straight up. And guys, again, about this podcast, this last podcast, we don't normally garner 300 views. So this was a popular podcast for us, 49ers against the Jaguars. We're all over this thinking Jaguars have some momentum. And you can hear me on the podcast saying, I don't think the Jaguars offense is there. Rob, you're clearly telling me you still believe that Trevor Lawrence and Ridley are going to be just fine. I asked you on the podcast, you think they're going to have fantasy value going forward, and you're like, oh, yes. So this begs the question, now that I've moved on from Trevor and Ridley and you wanted these guys so bad, I went and offered you the trade Trevor and Ridley for Eckler. You turned it down. To make matters worse, what I didn't like and what the league started texting me about is after I got Herbert, you went and instead of making the trade offer to me for Trevor or anybody like that, you went to someone else in the league and you gave them a really bad deal to get Alvin Kamara. And I already sent out this notice about what we're doing with, the starting RB hoarding. And as a commissioner, we're not allowing that anymore. So I'm starting to get texts immediately from people saying, what's going on? Why is Rob getting another RB? What's this guy doing trading Kamara? And I'm like, all right, no, I hear you guys. Yeah, loud and clear. And because I do agree with what the owners are coming to me and saying, I told you I have final call on that, and we're going to nix that trade. But I was gracious enough to give you 24 hours to try and make that happen before too many people in the league turned it down. Because at that time, we weren't at the veto threshold. I call you excited, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I see what you're doing. You're getting Alvin Kamara, and I see what's going on here. You'll trade me Eckler, and then you'll get Lawrence and Ridley. This is awesome. Let's go. And I could hear in your voice when you're like, yeah, maybe that's not my plan. I send you the original trade you proposed to me, and you turned it down. So right now it looks like you're just kind of mad that Herbert went to my team, and you wanted to make one more trade in spite of it all. So what I'm trying to say here is you can't go on the podcast and say the Jaguars are a powerhouse and Trevor Lawrence is still it and Calvin Ridley's got plenty of time and this trifecta of Jaguars offense, we're going to the Super Bowl and we can't be doing that and then not acting on it. The trade you sent me was, obviously ridiculous. I told you I'd take 2 trades. I'd give you this, young 20-something-year-old Trevor Lawrence you believe in for an aging, almost out of the league Travis Kelce by the next 2 years, or you can do the original trade of Trevor Lawrence and Ridley for Eckler. Now all of a sudden you don't believe in that trade. Now all of a sudden you don't believe in Trevor Lawrence and Ridley and the Jaguars. That's a glaring statement to me, and this is why it's time to talk about Trevor. This guy's career is over. If I can't get rid of Trevor Lawrence in a league where somebody has been trying to get him from me all season, just because of last game, this is why people make fun of Jacksonville and call us fair weather fans. And this is why I'm not a fan of just picking a favorite baseball team or whatever. It's like you got to grow up somewhere and see this stuff and have care and criticism to understand what's going on. So definitely, I take the L on the Jaguars prediction of this last episode, but I stand by what I've been saying, and it's that I don't think the Jaguars offense looks good. I think we were a fake 6-2. I think we're a fake 6-3. Now I'm not sure we walk all over Cincinnati. I'm not sure we walk all over Baltimore and say, no, we're going to have some problems. And with C.J. Stroud playing the way he has been playing, we're looking like we're in trouble now. So I will say going forward, there's going to be a necessary ethical adjustment on this podcast. I'm going to do a little bit better to call out mid-sentence what needs to be said, because the last thing I want is for this podcast to turn into Colin Coward, where we just talk about the flavor of the week and we look up some notes at the last second right before we go on air. That's not what this is about. This is about my particular opinion and analysis of fantasy football players, and I think at this point I've hit the nail on the head with Trevor. So as wrong as I've been about some stuff and as wrong as I was about the game, looks like I'm right about Trevor Lawrence, because the other guy doesn't even want him anymore. So it is time to talk about Trevor, and now it's time to stop talking about Trevor. The Jaguars probably go to the playoffs, and if they do, they're out round one. By next year, I say we make sure that Trevor starts looking to get traded. And, all I can say to that is Duval.
That's what fantasy with Rob and Ryan. Fantasy R&R.